Hello and welcome to Overdrive. I'm Rohit Paradkar and this is the new Kia Carens. Now it's based on the same three-row platform that was co-developed by Hyundai and Kia that gave us the Alcazar. But unlike that SUV crossover, this one is a multi-purpose people carrier. It slots in between the Suzuki Ertiga or XL6 and the Toyota Innova Crista. But that said, Kia wouldn't want you to compare it to other MPVs like the erstwhile Renault Logi or the Mahindra Marazzo because the Carens is simply more premium. It's just not as utilitarian. In fact, they're not even calling it an MPV. They're insisting that this is a recreational vehicle or RV. Walter White wouldn't agree. And if you've had to Google that name, hopefully you will not have any wrong ideas about this RV. Let's just find out what the Carens is all about. The Carens takes a fresh design approach compared to what we've seen from Kia India so far. They're calling it the Opposites United design philosophy, which, like the Alcazar, places the headlight in the bumper. The LED DRLs that form the brow also double up as blinkers on the top trim, placing them in a safer and more visible position than the Alcazar. The detailing of the taillights have a sonnet inspiration to them, and while the seamless reflector strip establishes width, the multi-layered tailgate helps the Carens look tall. Those with a keen eye will also appreciate the paint quality, and I think the blue, red or grey Carens look the best. I quite like the attention to detail. For example, the knurled finish that we appreciated on the Sonnet or the Seltos finds its way here too, but not just on the grille but also in the chrome garnish. Not just in the front bumper but also in the rear bumper. So I like this attention to detail. It just makes it feel more premium. It feels like Kia's put a lot of thought into it. Sadly though, none of these details are visible from afar, and the Carens ends up looking rather drab from a distance, especially because the face isn't as striking as its siblings. That said, the face, I think it looks a bit docile to me. They insist that the tiger nose is still there, though I can't see it. I think it's a bit too subtle, maybe fit for an electric vehicle. But that said, I think it looks smart overall. Also, the bonnet or the face is quite low slung compared to what we've seen on the Seltos. Now, that has its gains, of course. I think theoretically it will be better for the pedestrian in case of an accident, and it also has its gains in terms of the aerodynamic efficiency. For example, the coefficient of drag for this car is 0.31 CD. Had they gone with the face of the Seltos instead, which has the more imposing tiger nose, that number or that particular value would be 0.33 CD. Speaking of numbers, the Carens isn't as long, wide or tall as the Marazzo or the Innova Crista, but it is larger in all respects than the Alcazar and the XL6. The Carens does have some class-leading figures in terms of its dimensions or even its wheelbase when you compare it to some of the other three-row offerings around this particular price bracket. But it does come across as a very lean-looking car. It doesn't feel as big as what the dimensions would suggest. So that bold SUV stance, that's not happening if that is what you're looking for. I think larger wheels, fatter tires, a more imposing and a more upright grille, that would have made it look a little bit better in my opinion. That said, I think it looks quite stylish, quite sleek. It looks like a more sophisticated version of something like the Suzuki XL6, but a size larger. At 2,780mm, it has the longest wheelbase in the class, pipping even the Crista in that respect. So they say the name comes from the words car and renaissance. That is why Carens. They also wanted to have a similar ring to the word carnival so that it helps establish the fact that this car belongs to Kia's family of premium people carriers and not some commonplace MPVs or crossovers. Such privilege. You should be called Carens instead. Jokes apart, I think what they should have done is given this car a sliding rear door. That would have helped establish that carnival connection a lot better. It would have also set this car apart from the other three-row offerings in this particular space. And please don't bring price into the picture because if the Omni could do it, this car certainly could. Now, because this sits on a wider or a longer wheelbase, the rear door is a lot wider than its sibling, the Alcazar. And that ensures that ingress and egress in the second and the third row is actually quite easy. What I also like is this little button on the second row seats. Press it and it just drops the seat. No need to pull any levers, nothing. You know what? Some of the more luxury-oriented Germans with 3 rows don't come with a feature like this. I think that is very thoughtful. You will certainly appreciate the window blinds because those wide doors also have one of the widest windows you will see in this price bracket. Apart from the wide door aperture, the floor is not too tall, not too low. So getting in and out is going to be an easy affair for kids, for older people, for people with knee or back issues. It shouldn't be that much of a problem. What you see here is the 6-seater layout, which means you get these 2 captain seats in the middle row. You also get a 7-seater layout where you get a flat bench in the middle row. That has a 40-60 split. Now, in terms of these captain seats, they're not the same size as the captain seats that you have in the front row, which means that the shoulder support is fine for me at 5'8", but for taller people, it could be a problem. Similarly, the headroom could be a problem for taller people. However, they have scooped out a little bit more space so that the second row occupants can get a slightly generous headroom, while the third row occupants will not feel claustrophobic. But I know what you're thinking. The Alcazar has a panoramic sunroof. Where's the panoramic sunroof on this car? Well, just because they have put these AC vents on top, they have not been able to integrate a panoramic sunroof in here. You only get it on the front row. Now, if you've seen my reviews previously, I've always said that I am not a big fan of these roof-mounted AC vents because they can actually give you a headache, especially in places like Mumbai. If you are coming from a really hot outdoor environment and getting into the car and having these air vents blow cold air on your head, you might have a headache. So for those kind of scenarios, what Kia has done is they've also added a diffuser to the rear AC vents, and that sort of diffuses the airflow. It doesn't make it as strong as a typical roof-mounted air vent would, and that solves the problem of the headache. Now, in terms of the equipment for the second row, you get this little cubby hole to keep your phone. You also have these pockets right here if you want to keep your devices here instead. You get 2 USB-C chargers. They are complemented by another USB-C charger at the front, a USB-A charger, a 12-volt socket, and also a wireless charger with a cooling function. So charging your gadgets, including something like a dash cam, is not a problem at all. There are plenty of charging solutions right here. You also get a flow control for these AC vents, a 4-step flow control, the knob for which is very nicely done. It feels quite nice to the touch and also has a tactile feel to it, so it feels nice and premium. Now, in fact, everything here feels nice and premium. However, there is a bit of a disconnect when you look at the seat backs of the front seats. You have this tray here. This is something that we saw on the Alcazar as well. You can't really put a laptop here, even if it's a small laptop, because this tends to just fall off very easily. But you can, however, put a tablet device, an iPad or something, if you want to do some kind of video conferencing. You also have a small cup holder here and this little cargo net. Now, on the Alcazar, you get a similar unit here as well, but as you can see here, you get this big gadget. So this is the air filtration system. Now, we've seen Kia and Hyundai cars take air filtration very seriously. We've seen them integrated very nicely in the center armrest, in the front AC, etc. But now, because of the size of this car, they have had to go with a bigger unit, and this was the best place that they could put it. Of course, there are maybe different places that they could have put it. They could have used the roof. They could have probably put it under the seat and given the controls on the infotainment itself. So yeah, there were permutations and combinations possible, and I think they should have done that instead of putting it here, which feels like a bit of an afterthought, especially looking at how everything else is so well thought of. Now, since I'm on the topic of the air filtration system, Kia says that it can go from an AQI of 999 to around 40 in 45 minutes. That's the amount of time it takes. Because you have connected tech, you can always pre-cool the cabin, start this maybe 45 minutes before you're going to enter the cabin, and the cabin will have clean air for you. This is a silent system as always, and changing the filter is again not a very difficult affair. It's a small notch here. It's hidden away from your vision, so kids are probably not going to mess with it easily, and this is how the filtration system comes out. It also comes with a fragrancing function. You have 3 different fragrancing styles to choose from. I'm sure aftermarket options will be added to it as well. But the fragrancing itself, that is not too powerful. It doesn't fill up the cabin a little too much. So some people who feel sick with these kind of systems or these kind of smells are not going to have a problem in this cabin. Now, usually I don't like getting into the third row of these cars, but honestly, it's not so bad in here. The Carens has really sort of surprised me pleasantly. You see, you don't have to sit in much of a knees up position.
Now you can adjust the recline and the reach for this seat to an extent, but the knee room is actually quite good. The foot space is actually quite good too. And I'm an adult, I'm not a kid. Kids are going to have a much more comfortable time in here. What I also like is that the seat back can be reclined. This one, for example, has been reclined by 33 degrees. That's the limit that you can take it to. While mine is a little bit more upright, and this is how I like it. But if you really want to just have that laid back drive in here, you can do that as well. You get those similar AC vents like we saw in the second row, so they can be adjusted for the diffused flow, etc. And you also have a cup holder. You also have a USB-C charging port here, one on this side, one cup holder this side. So overall, it's actually not a bad place to be in.
So if the third row comfort is very, very important to you, the Carens could be a better choice than the Alcazar or even the XUV 700. With the 3 rows up, the boot space is a scanty 216 litres, but since there is no panoramic roof, you could invest in a roof rack if you are going to go on road trips with a full house very often. There are plenty of storage spaces in the car, including shelves in the door pads and a bin under the front passenger seat.
I keep coming back to the name of this car. It's pronounced Carens and not Carens. So let's not have any Carens memes and jokes, okay? And since this platform has already proved its reliability, I don't think this car is going to have to call the showroom manager every now and then, or the workshop manager or the service manager. But in case you need to call someone like help, SOS, emergency, RSA, or even just speak to the AVN, there are switches here on the rear view mirror. You have the SOS, you have the RSA, and you have the Kia Connect, pressing which will help you talk to the AVN, give it commands that you have to. You also have a speech switch on the steering wheel if that is more convenient.
The flat bottom steering wheel looks great, but somehow its position always seems lower for your seating height, and that can feel awkward to some drivers. The front seats are the most comfortable in this cabin, but all the adjustments are mechanical.
Now, usually the dashboard layouts of MPVs are pretty utilitarian and in turn boring, which is why the Carens sets itself apart even in this department. The overall layout, it looks quite appealing. The textures used, they are quite nice. I don't usually like piano blacks, but they've added this nice little texture, nice little print on it, so it doesn't look blemished quite easily with dust or fingerprints, etc. So that looks quite nice too. And the fit and finish, it matches the asking price.
Speaking of price, the trim you choose also dictates the color options that you get inside the cabin. Lower trims get a black and beige treatment, while this range topper gets the brighter upholstery, which, as you would expect, is bound to get soiled easily.
And just like we spoke about the attention to detail on the outside, I also like the attention to detail on the inside. You not only get different colors to choose from depending on the trim levels, but even all the elements are so nicely laid out. For example, look at the AC vents, so discreetly integrated within the lines, within the layers of the dashboard. I quite like it. While the AC vents are here, they've also added this tiny little vent out here so that you can attach a fragrancing system. As for the rest of the layout, despite being layered, it looks quite harmonious. And nothing, in fact, looks like an afterthought. Everything is very nicely integrated. In fact, a lot of thought has gone into the layout. Like, for example, on the passenger side, you get this cup holder, which is cool because of the AC vent. Under the driver's side, you get this little storage bin. You can use it to keep your toll card, loose change, etc. So it's all very thoughtfully done, and I quite like it. On the top of the line models, you get a 10.25-inch infotainment. You also get a fully digital instrumentation. On the lower models, you still get a fully digital instrumentation, though it's smaller in size. Similarly, the infotainment is also smaller in size.
The question is, do you need such a feature-rich infotainment in an MPV? That is for you to decide. There are 66 connected features with this updated widescreen infotainment system. There is a 64-color ambient lighting system as well, and an 8-speaker Bose audio unit, which will also adapt the music settings to offset any wind or road noises creeping into the cabin. That is stuff of luxury cars. One feature I find the most useful though, if you have kids, is the quiet mode, which will restrict the speaker volume to 25 and will only play the audio through the front speakers so that your kids can snooze in peace. And you can also help them sleep using ambient sounds of the forest or the sea waves. Speaking of children, while ISOFIX mounts are standard, so are these safety systems across all the trims.
I think that's a great move by Kia to really make all this safety equipment standard across the range. So you see, even if the crash test agencies want to pick out an under-equipped variant for their crash tests, they can't. Neither can you. So that's good news for the family. One other safety feature that we've not been able to put to the test on this particular first drive is the hill descent control. But I'm glad that this car gets a hill descent control. They are calling it a recreational vehicle. It doesn't really have all-wheel drive, or it doesn't even have the different terrain modes, the kind that we saw in the Seltos. But if you were to take it to, say, a slightly trickier terrain, and if you were to encounter a downhill patch, especially something that is gravelly or on loose terrain, there the hill descent control might just come in handy if you are, feeling a little scared or a little unnerved about carrying an entire family downhill on a slippery surface. So I think that is where the hill descent control will come in handy, and I'm glad that they've included it on this car. Building further on the safety aspect, you get all 4 disc brakes as standard, and I really like the tuning of the brakes on this. The brake pedal feel is quite good. The brake pedal feel is progressive. It's not too grabby, whether you're braking at high speeds on the highway or simply using the brakes at city speeds. It feels nice and progressive. It's very easy to get used to. What I also like is how the brakes and the gearbox, the automatic gearbox, have been tuned together. Seldom do you feel the need to use the paddle shifters to engage better engine braking when you are maybe in an emergency braking situation, even with a full house. The braking is that good. Sometimes you do feel with MPVs or 3-row SUVs where, because of all the load and the momentum that you're carrying, sometimes the braking just feels inadequate, and then you have to resort to manual downshifting as well to give it the aid of engine braking. Here, it doesn't really need it all that much. It doesn't feel like you have to take manual control of the gearbox. So I like how the entire braking and the engine braking has been tuned together. What I'm a little bit on the fence about is this feature where the AVN keeps talking to you, where it keeps reading out different rules or road signs. I don't even see the road signs, but it will keep telling you this is a no overtaking zone, this is a crossing, this is a zebra crossing coming up. I mean, I don't need you to keep telling me that. It keeps, you just heard that. It just said overtaking is prohibited in this zone. I don't want to keep knowing this every now and then. I know I'm on the fence. It may work for some. It may be a good safety feature to have, but with the amount of times that it keeps telling me this, I think it's a bit intrusive. Now, as we've seen with most new cars from Kia, there are a plethora of engines and gearbox options for you to choose from depending on your pocket size. But unlike the Alcazar, which uses the 2-liter new engine from the Elantra, the 2-liter petrol engine, this one continues to use the same 1.4-liter turbocharged direct injection petrol engine that we've seen in the Creta, in the Seltos. And honestly, having lived with the Creta 1.4 for so long, I think this 140 PS engine is more than adequate for the Carens, even if you are running a full house.
And for most days, when you aren't really traveling with all the 3 rows occupied, the 1.4 will actually return better fuel economy compared to the 2-liter petrol. And since these engines are shared with the Seltos, I hope that Kia passes on the benefits of economies of scale to the customer and prices the Carens lower than the Alcazar.
The other engine is, of course, the tried and tested diesel engine. We love that quite a bit on the Creta, but with the 3-row application, we've said in the past that it sometimes feels a bit inadequate, especially if you are using it with the automatic transmission, because sometimes that automatic is a little late to respond, especially when you want to get those quick overtakes, negotiate a gap in traffic. And with a full house, sometimes it just doesn't give you that instantaneous power and torque. On most other occasions, like commuting in the city, cruising on the highway, it does its job just fine. So if you want a slightly enthusiastic bit of performance from that diesel engine, you might want to choose the manual. But if you choose the convenience of the automatic, all you need to do is just plan your overtakes a little bit better. There are 3 driving modes to choose from: Eco, Normal and Sport, and you can cycle between them using this little switch on the tunnel console. Eco, as you would expect, will dull down the throttle and the gearbox responses to give you better fuel economy. Normal will keep it at an optimum balance, so if you're cruising on the highway or just driving in the city and don't care much about the fuel economy, you can just leave it at normal. It also makes the gearbox a little bit more responsive. Sport is where the responses are most alert from the gearbox and the engine. It also lets you rev higher, it also lets you stay at higher rev for longer. How many revs? That you can read because you have a digital readout for that, but there is no classic tachometer out here. And that's a bit of a downer. If you have 3 drive modes, if they're changing colors on the digital instrumentation, I think they ought to have also changed the layouts, given me a tachometer. What's a sport mode without a tachometer? If I was Karen, I would certainly ask for the UI designer and check this with him or her.
The drive modes are available on the diesel too, but on this powertrain, the Eco mode makes it quite sluggish and therefore pointless in my books. You're better off with the normal mode when traveling alone and sport mode when you're traveling with more than 5 passengers.
Now on this particular test, we've only been able to sample the petrol and the diesel automatics, but Kia also assures that the manual transmission has a lighter clutch now, lighter than even the Seltos. So in case you choose the manual, bumper to bumper traffic shouldn't be too worrisome, shouldn't be too cumbersome, is what Kia assures. We haven't tested it, so I can't comment much on that, but if you do manage to test drive a diesel or a petrol manual, do let us know what the clutch feel is like in the comments below. What I'm really impressed with is the ride quality. Now, we've typically seen that Hyundai cars and Kia cars have different suspension setups. Hyundais usually feel a little softer. The Kia cars, they feel a little sportier. They have a slightly firmer setup. But with the Carens and the kind of intent that this car has, they've actually gone even softer than the Alcazar. That is a good thing. I mean, I was quite impressed with the ride quality that the Alcazar has to offer. This one goes a notch further. On ruts, on joints, it just feels quite nice. And even if I am driving with, say, an empty car, it still feels quite nice. There is no wallowy feel at speed. There's no floaty feel at highway speeds. So overall, it feels quite nice, quite well put together. And when you're out on the bad roads, like I just went over a rumbler patch and you hardly heard it inside the cabin. So the suspension setup is actually quite good. With a full house, it gets even better.
The normal mode will also make the steering light and convenient for city use. And maneuvering this car through congested traffic or making lane changes at highway speeds never feels unnerving. There's no wallowy feel, neither with an empty cabin nor with a full house, which is great news for an MPV. Sure, it isn't as sharp around the bends as the Seltos, which has a shorter wheelbase, and it does make its length evident around the tight switchbacks, but the body roll is well controlled. Those upgrading from a hatchback or a compact sedan will appreciate the visibility of the large glass house and how easy it is to get a judgment of all the 4 corners of the car. But you only get a reversing camera and no 360-degree camera feed or blind spot cameras like on the Alcazar.
For those of you wanting to go long distance, there was one little feature that I really appreciated in the Alcazar. Sadly, it has been given the miss in this particular car, and that is extendable sun visors. If I were to open the sun visor, it still leaves this empty patch here. On the Alcazar, you could just pull this out and use it to completely block off the sunlight. Here, you can't do that. I think they should have done that. Probably the customer research didn't see much value in it.
Let's sum it up then. The design is polarizing in my opinion and doesn't wow the audience as the Seltos did, nor does it have the grand presence of the Carnival, and that could hurt the Carens' prospects when compared to the Innova, Safari or the XUV700. It does miss out on some usable features here and there, but it pips the Alcazar and some of the other 3-row offerings with its space and the 3rd-row comfort. It also secures the cabin with a long list of standard safety features, and the more sophisticated cabin sets it apart from the other MPVs. So if you are the rare kind who are considering an MPV over an SUV in this price bracket, the Carens certainly deserves your attention.